All right, here we go. Welcome on in, everyone. I will start by issuing a retraction from the stream from a couple of days ago when I said that it looked like we had the news reporting more and more on airplane incidents that were occurring, and I looked into it a little bit. According to Wikipedia, last year for 2024, we had 30 airline incidents. Now, that appears to be an exceptionally low number. Uh, the previous year, we had 100 for the whole year of 2023, and the number for 2022 was similar, up in the 90s, I believe. We are currently, as of late February 2025, at 89 aviation incidents. So, evidently, we are having significant troubles beyond what would be considered normal to get to 89 in 2 months rather than a full year. Now, to what degree that can be blamed on anyone or anything in particular, I'm not entirely clear. But I did want to state that I uh, evidently misrepresented what was going on as far as the news just picking up more on it, like they had with the derailments following the East Palestine uh, train derailment, and suddenly every other train derailment was in the news. But turns out this is a bit more than that. We are certainly experiencing significantly more airline issues than we have for the past, 4 or 5 years at least. Which is as far back as I looked. I could do a whole thing on it, but it was more of a quick glance. That being said, for those who don't know, the individual in the image there is Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain famously came back from a conference in Germany in 1938, declaring peace in our time after ceding the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia to Hitler. So, now that Hitler had his Lebensraum, certainly there would be peace in our time. This would be looked back on, obviously, as a mistake. Ceding anything to Nazis just emboldens them. Generally speaking, if a fascist is pushing for something beyond what is generally being allowed, uh, they're asking for an inch, they're going to take a mile. It's a frustrating thing to watch happen again and again in history, but appeasement always appears to be the easy solution. Oh, it's just this little thing. But again and again, you get, the invasion of Poland, that kind of thing. But it's always a push. There's always something that they are seeking. And the idea from people who don't want to rock the boat is generally that, oh, we can give them this little thing. And, in Chamberlain's case, Chamberlain gets a lot of shit. In fairness to Chamberlain, it was 1938, 20 years since the last World War. Hitler wanted a piece of a foreign country, not the country that he was representing. And there were a whole lot of 40 to 50-year-olds back home who were really, really opposed to the idea of getting drawn into another war due to an alliance because they knew what that was like from 20 years back, the ones that survived it anyway. To his credit, he he went over there and attempted to negotiate, but his mistake was appeasement. Now, if he had not appeased Hitler and had gone into a conflict, the trouble that he was facing at the time was there was no standing army, or at least not one large enough to fight a war. There had been pretty significant disarmament since the First World War, and given the just complete slog that that had been, the loss of lives, war was pretty unpopular back home. So they hadn't been, spending a great deal of the budget on arming the military, having troops ready, that sort of thing. So that's in Chamberlain's defense. That said, I still think he made the wrong call because appeasing fascists only ever goes one way. Once they've got the inch, they take the mile. And so when the war did finally break out, they had been building an army, so they were able to respond. But even so, they ceded the Sudetenland. Germany took their Lebensraum from the Czechs, incidentally, who had little to no say in this, um, and then invaded Poland, invaded France, used Belgium as a speed bump to get to France because the Maginot Line is turns out completely ineffective if you just go through Belgium instead. But the whole idea of appeasement is you're kicking the can down the road, and the problems when they finally come home to roost are going to be that much worse for it. That is kind of my thing there under the image. Hey, Chuck learned from his mistakes. For those who are not following the news extremely closely, Chuck Schumer is looking to pull a Chamberlain, if you will, um, and potentially sign the package in front of Congress to prevent the shutdown of the government, when, in my personal opinion, he should be standing fast. Alexandria Ocasio Cortez uh, put out a statement against him earlier today, uh, uh, in that it looks like he's folding to their demands. Was well spoken as usual, but frustrating to see the Senate Minority Leader not be obstructionist for the first time since the Obama years. So I don't know how it's going to go. I hope that they hold the line, but there is a distinct possibility that they will cede power to Trump through that. Uh, Not that Congress has been doing a great job of keeping a hold on their power since the inauguration, but ceding further power again will invariably go worse. You're kicking the can down the line. You're looking at the potential for just additional trouble. And the question is, as far as the politicians that are there making that decision, how badly is it going to affect them? Because that tends to be the lens through which they look at things. I mean, understandably, humans are a selfish species by nature, but we're also social. We have the ability to work together. Whether or not we choose to is a whole other thing. And to my mind, Democrats have been far too willing to quote unquote take the high road, do things in the name of unity, when it's extremely clear that Republicans aren't playing on that same field. It's a question of they will go ahead and take a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and Democrats will go, hey, that's wrong. but in the name of unity, we gotta, work together. And it's just incredibly clear that there's no intention to actually work together on the Republican side of things. I I would love if uh, the spirit of compromise was still a thing in our government, but as far as I can tell, we elected a black man in 2008 and compromise went away. Gridlock came in to Congress, and we haven't seen anything uh, much since. Oh, thank you, Alexis, for the follow. Appreciate it. Um, but I'm looking at years and years of history showing this same pattern again and again. And the more that you cede to a fascist, the more you are causing problems for yourself down the line. Do I have a solid answer for that? Uh, not really. Um, a lot of people want to, call for a revolution, burn it all down, but the there has been historically one revolution that was quote unquote the bloodless revolution, and that was because the people that were about to get cooed left the country. Um, and so, in any case that you're talking about that sort of action, the the first people that are going to get harmed are the people that don't have private security forces around them at all times. So it's easy to say, but the, the loss of life from anything like that would be immeasurable. I mean, you're looking at this from the perspective of just your average individual, and that's where I think it's incredibly important that people like Chuck Schumer, obviously AOC is planning to hold the line, where you do your absolute best to legally prevent everything that's happening, knowing that your opponent will ignore the law, and basically doing your best to force that behavior to hit a breaking point as soon as possible so the least amount of damage can be done in the meantime. Whether we're going to manage that or not kind of comes down to how the votes go today, and I will likely be speaking on that come Sunday evening rather, because we'll know more about it. But definitely sitting here hoping that congressional Democrats can hold the line for the first time in 20 years. You know, I would love to be wrong. I just don't know that it's going to happen. I'm not, trying to be a downer. I just watch again and again as one or two Democrats fold and suddenly an even house or a slight majority become meaningless. I mean, it was Manchin and Cinema last time around, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Interesting in the Chinese sense. The old curse, may you live in interesting times. I'd really like to stop, if I'm honest, between the plagues and the rise of various harmful ideologies across the world. But I mean, and it comes down to it's not a political problem, practically speaking. I mean, it becomes a political problem, but the real fight isn't in the political theater, it's in the financial theater. It's invariably comes down to the wealthy versus those without, because the wealthy want more and more and more. And it always fascinates me when you get arguments from people that'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember this back in 2016. It was like, oh, yeah, Donald Trump is the perfect candidate for office. because he's got so much money, he can't be bribed. And people said the same thing about Elon Musk running Doge. And I'm sitting here going, so they have an absolute shitload of money and they make an absolute shitload of money. It's like, okay, why would that make them safer handling the finances? Like, are you the kind of person that is like, oh yeah, we can trust Steve with this pile of heroin because he. It's just like, okay, I do we trust that? Do we? As far as I can tell, they're addicts. Giving them access to more money seems like a bad idea, but okay. I'm very much of the opinion that getting people together who own that capital, put that capital in, whether it was taxes or whatever else, are far more likely to handle it responsibly when it's their money. Whereas you see, Trump going to his golf resort at $18 million a weekend for the taxpayer, and it's the taxpayer footing that bill. So I think I saw the figure. It was like $151 million for the golfing that Trump did in his first term, and now we're seeing it again in the second, which I find frustrating. Um, kind of in a helpless sense, if I'm honest. I read the news, it brings on the depression, and I'm like, man, I should stop doing that. But then I sit here and go, well, I could stop reading the news, and sure, I would be less depressed, but I would also be ignorant of what's happening. I wouldn't know the harm that's being caused, and my ignorance of the harm doesn't actually prevent the harm from happening. So, at the very least, I can speak on what's happening if I'm more aware of it. And I really don't know which is better for my mental health, if I'm honest. Because it's the same thing, if I'm honest. It's kicking the can down the road. I can appease my mental health a little bit, but then I get sucker punched by all the bad things that are happening when it comes to a head, instead of being aware and having the ability to see things coming. So, uh, at this point, I just read the news every day or two. Um, every two, if I can really control myself and not look at it for a day. But I definitely don't know what the answer is on that one. And anybody's welcome to put in chat if they've got opinions on that. I just every day, I and this was kind of my experience in the first Trump term. It's like every day I wake up and I'm like, I can check the news and it's gonna depress me, but I kind of need to know what the president did on the world stage that embarrassed us all last night. Sometimes literally last night. I mean, the man tweeted from the toilet at 3 a.m. constantly, which, you know, wasn't the greatest look for us as a country, but I guess we all got to laugh at Kofifi. That was excellent, I guess. The rest of it, not so much, but eh, I don't know. At some level, the yeah. Particularly, Evan said, "Oh God, yeah." No cable news. That's not a bad call. I personally read my news. Um, so Evan, then are you looking at? Are you a federal employee or a contractor, or is this just a broader? threat to the economy sort of thing. Because I, my part-time job at the very least is not, I don't think, at risk of firing me, but I'm also not federal worker. Applied a couple of times. Contractor. Yeah, yeah. That is definitely. Um, I have several friends that are in that boat, and all of the funding getting cut is affecting them. And then the judge is going, "Hey, you can't cut that funding." Some of them are like, "Maybe." So it's Schrodinger's job at this point for a lot of them. It's like if we look in the box, maybe we'll find out. But it's definitely something that they wake up to every day, going, "Hey, do I have a job?" Like, and that sort of uncertainty mixed with plunging stock market, mixed with general prices surging across the board, doesn't make for, pleasant morning reading for sure. I just, I am invariably frustrated. And it's one of those things where I look at the news and I'm like, man, I wish the Democrats would do something. But frankly, people didn't turn out for the Democrats. They wound up in a minority position. It's their ability to do things was limited. Now, there was a snap election in one of the swing states recently that kind of brought parity in Congress. But even so, with the tiebreaker vote going to Vance, there's very little that congressional Democrats can do. Now, some of them, I mean, Mark Kelly's standing up, at least talking about it. Bernie, as always, is there. And to go on a tangent for a moment, I mean, Bernie Sanders is a genuinely incredible individual as far as maintaining a set of values for an extended period of time as a politician. There are pictures of him in the 60s getting arrested at civil rights marches. He was, despite not being a gun guy, very gun friendly as governor of Vermont, ranking politician. I want to say governor. Um, but knew that it was a gun friendly state. Vermont's very much a, you know, we firmly believe that gay married couples should be able to defend their homegrown weed with whatever guns they want kind of state. And so he governed in that manner. Um, and has always been an advocate for improving healthcare. Um, I get called a bit of a radical because personally, back in 2016, I wanted to see the Sanders Warren ticket, you know, both healthcare and education up there, but didn't swing that way, obviously. Um, that said, I'm also a pragmatist, damage mitigation. I voted Clinton in 2016, then Biden, then Harris, even if I wasn't happy with any of them particularly. Now, to Biden's credit, he pleasantly surprised me as a politician, or as a president rather, in that he was the most progressive president of my lifetime, which really sort of shocked me, given his history in Congress. But passed all kinds of, I mean, the infrastructure bill alone, he spent more on infrastructure, both adjusted and not adjusted for inflation, since for more than any president since Eisenhower, um, which was incredibly important because Eisenhower spent the money, but no president in between was really focused on maintenance of things like roads, phone lines, power lines, etc. Because it's not sexy. You can't, like, telling voters, you're like, hey, I'm going to focus on the important stuff. I'm going to focus on maintenance. It's not something you can go out and campaign on in the same way that someone can go, hey, I'm going to ensure, you know, abortion rights get enshrined in our state constitution or federally or whatever else. Um, but it's incredibly important. And there was back in Obama's second term, I want to say. There was a report that came out. It might have been late Obama, early Trump. A report that came out that said something like 70,000 bridges in the U.S. were at risk of failing due to extended periods of basically lack of maintenance. Like we put them up, but we didn't have the sort of funding to actually make sure that they continued to be safe. And to his credit, Biden did that. And I didn't love when, the railway workers were striking and he was like, no, y'all gotta work. But again, to his credit, that was one of those where the headlines made it look worse than it was because he said, hey, no, sorry, you're actually required. We need you to work. But then went in afterwards and ensured that some of their demands were met from the company. So, I mean, definitely more than I expected. I mean, I'll say when I voted Clinton, I was like, I'm not going to like this. We're just going to get 4 years of pro corporate rubber stamped bullshit. But clearly better than the train wreck that was Trump. So I don't feel like I was, Nostradamus for calling that one. But I definitely, despite not being happy with Democrats, tend to vote that way, if only because it's the lesser of two evils, and I'm well aware that an independent candidate basically can't win in the first past the post system, where unless we get ranked choice voting across the board, we're kind of stuck with the two-party system, which Washington warned against. He was aware that that was going to turn into a shit show. Uh, we briefly had three parties. We had uh, the Whigs in there for a bit, but certainly in my lifetime, it's been a very strong two-party system, which leaves very little room for nuanced conversation. I'll say myself, firm believer in the Second Amendment. I think in a country with 400,000 guns already in it, at that point, you should absolutely be able to protect yourself. If you wanted to make the argument in a country with fewer guns, like, hey, to what degree do we restrict this? That's fair, but given where the U.S. is at now, I think if people are looking to protect themselves, that's entirely up to them. Though, to be honest, my whole so- social and political lexicon can be summed up as saying, leave people alone. Like, you don't like abortions, don't get one. You don't like guns, don't buy one. You don't want to, you know, you have no intention of being trans? All right, don't do that. You don't like that people are trans? Okay, leave them alone. It doesn't affect you. It's one of those things where, like, I might fall into the libertarian camp if I didn't understand why taxes were important, but I do, so can't really go there. It's just one of those that I don't see the need to. I don't understand many people's need to control others and what they're doing in ways that just functionally don't affect anyone else. Um, and part of that is, I mean, I don't get the mindset, which is part of my problem as far as trying to empathize with anyone further right. They're looking for control in a way that I don't consider socially acceptable, you know? Like, and the fact that, I mean, even now, we're just now coming up on 10 years of legal gay marriage in the US, and you can bet that there are certain members of the Supreme Court that are looking to take that away because they've said so. Thomas, in particular, I know. Um, though one wonders exactly how far back he plans to roll marriage laws, given that he himself is in an interracial marriage. And that was the thing before gay marriage. That was the big, like, can we do this question. that case, incidentally, was called Loving v. Virginia, which, if an author put that in a fiction book, he'd be like, little on the nose. But yeah, that the Loving case was the big case before the gay marriage case in 2015. And I just don't get it. It's like it doesn't affect you. It's as far as I'm concerned, the only time that I should have a say in who somebody sleeps with is if that somebody is me. And to be honest, that one doesn't come up a ton, so not really a problem. I don't know. As usual, it comes down to just respecting other people, and it's clear that to one degree or another, there is a political side in the U.S. that broadly does, and a side in the U.S. that broadly doesn't. Um, and watching congressional Democrats just kind of keel over, do little to nothing when it comes to protecting I mean, their political power. That's honestly the fascinating thing to me, right? Is you're looking at a group of people who have uh, enumerated powers, particularly the power of the purse. The president is stepping up and throwing out executive orders that trample all over that power. And I mean, the Republican side are in lockstep for allowing that to happen. And the Democrats are showing up at the State of the Union with fucking ping pong paddles to say, oh, yeah, we disapprove. Like, at least Al Green stood up and got himself kicked out. The rest of them, I mean, my God, talk about a weak response. In Serbia, the opposition party was throwing smoke bombs last week. Fucking ping pong paddle and t-shirts. They, I have significant concerns that congressional Democrats are going to do the Weimar Republic thing and go, oh, but it would be so uncivilized to oppose this fascist takeover. It's like, well, yeah, but might be what we need at the moment. Maybe do a bit of uncivilized. I'm just, you know, it's frustrating to see again and again. Um, and I never placed a ton of hope in Democrats, just basically that they wouldn't make things worse. I'll say I didn't vote for Obama because I was too young at the time. My first presidential election was 2016. But as much as I felt the hope and change message was great, I definitely opposed a lot of his foreign policy, namely drone bombing the shit out of people in the Middle East, with the inherent problem of that being like, hey, we're way up high with a camera, and like, even if you've got troops on the ground, target identification is a major problem, and a whole lot of innocent Iraqis and Afghanis got blown up. So it's one of those things where I think if you elect a Democrat, you get decent domestic policy and shitty foreign policy, and if you elect a Republican, you get shitty domestic policy and shitty foreign policy, which makes the choice pretty clear cut to me. But I don't know. I, I, I don't. It's tough to really pinpoint the problem because at some level, I think it goes back to Nixon, right? You've got the Watergate scandal. Um, Republican left office and was pardoned by Ford. Um, and Republicans at the time basically went, hey, we don't ever want that to happen again because the news is reporting too accurately. They are taking things that happened and reporting on them in a way that makes us look bad because we did a bad thing. And so the theory of Fox News was born. And while it started out as a right leaning news station, it has since the removal of the fairness doctrine turned into a full on right wing propaganda machine. The problem being that they can say, oh, if it doesn't say news at the bottom, it's, just entertainment, which they did with Tucker Carlson when they went, no, no one could really take this as, the truth. It's just entertainment. His show is entertainment. Um, I'll And when people go, "Oh, you're so left wing, you just think it's propaganda because you don't agree with it," it's like, well, I $778 million says that they're fucking liars in the Dominion case, so that's where I fall personally. They just paid out a whole lot of money for lying, like most of $1 billion. And in fact, I was reading Newsmax just hit the end of their case and is paying out $40 million to Dominion over that same set of lies in the 2020 election about it being stolen. And so, following the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, we then run into the problem of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in 2010, which gave the go ahead for companies to start effectively bribing politicians. They said corporations are people, and we all laughed at Mitt Romney when he said it, but then the Supreme Court said he was right, so fuck us, I guess. Uh, but corporations became people, their money became speech, and so donating a functionally infinite amount of money for the purpose of either lobbying, quote unquote, a politician, or just outright giving them money became legal. And that's been the case for the past 15 years, um, which you could see in the rise of things like the Tea Party, which was a grassroots movement that was then kind of astroturfed and funded by big money. Um, the Tea Party also, in my mind, was kind of a turning point where Republicans for a very long time, in my childhood anyway, like you knew they were snakes, like they didn't believe the BS they were peddling. And I think the Tea Party was kind of when some of the true believers got in, where like McConnell's been a snake for decades. But he knows it's BS. Like he's just peddling what people want to hear to keep himself in office and keep himself in power and money, etc. Getting people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert in is where you kind of started to see the rot in the party, if only because you've got people that actually believe their own BS. It's like, you know, Stalin reading his own propaganda reports. Like, what, what do you think you're gonna get out of this? It, certainly not truth. Um, so seeing that enter the party, and then, I mean, obviously Trump was a turning point. You had the Access Hollywood tape, and you think back to all kinds of people who had their political ambitions ruined over just the smallest things. We had one guy with a weird yell. We had a politician photographed with a young woman sitting on his lap who was not his wife. That was it. He was out. Um, and Donald Trump just did worse things again and again and again. I'm like, okay, when does it stop? When does he leave? And there just wasn't a bottom of the barrel, apparently. It keeps getting worse, and clear if there are any members of the MAGA crowd at this point that could turn on him. Like, I think it is so tied into their identity at this point that a great many of them fundamentally cannot admit that they were wrong or that they were duped. And so you'll have people like Herman Cain who went into the grave proclaiming that COVID wasn't real as it killed him. I just really wish they weren't dragging the rest of us down with them. Uh, the right has a gigantic, incredibly well-funded media machine in lockstep with all their political messaging that keeps their followers in a self-contained ecosystem, and Democrats have infighting and are fine with being seen as equal to Republicans. Absolutely bonkers policies, crashing the economy, improving it by using renewable energy, not comparable to Texas. I firmly agree, Evan. Um, it the self-contained echo chamber thing is one incredibly effective, and two a sort of a danger of the internet in its concept. Um, and I remember around about the 2020 election, there was a website going around. Both sides are not the same, and it was just Republican and Democrat votes on different policies. And it was just so clear the delineation. I might actually see if I can find that real quick. Uh, just drop it in the chat. It's just votes. It's just voting information. But it shows so clearly how different the sides of the aisle are in the U.S. And I would say part of the problem that Democrats have is like they know how bad the Republicans are, and so they try to get by on the messaging that obviously you should vote for us, and they basically fail to capture low information voters. Failing to find the website. Okay. Anyway, they fail to capture low information voters because those people fundamentally don't know how different the sides are, and they are fed a narrative that's like, well, yeah, Republicans may be doing bad things, but the Democrats are just as bad or worse. With no facts to back that up, it just feeds into their confirmation bias. It's they would like to believe it, so sure, why not? That should be true. Uh, and it definitely is frustrating me to not see Democrats have better messaging. Because at some level they alternate between treating the electorate uh, like they either know more than they do, or treating them like idiots who should obviously vote for them without giving compelling reasons why. And I'll say, like, Harris was a different thing in that. Like, she had plans, she had policies. She was like 5,000 to any new business owner, 50,000 for any first-time homeowner. The policies were there, but they just weren't being reported on. It was the identity politics that kept coming up in the news, which conveniently is owned by billionaires who benefit from Republican policies. They see no reason to report it. I mean, Bezos uh, wouldn't allow the Washington Post to support Harris. There's missing, but anyway, uh, wouldn't allow them to come out in support of Harris because Bezos opposed it, and in fact, I believe the chief editor or the person in charge of the editorials just left because Bezos wouldn't allow certain things published there. Because again, he benefits from Republican policies. Tax policies that the Republicans change will put more money in the hands of billionaires, which is just fucking absurd when you've got people like Elon Musk who, if he could part with some part of his estimated like $1 trillion, give or take, uh, he'd solve world hunger. And he could be a fucking hero. people would love him. And it's clear that he wants that because he tries so hard to be cool and it's just never works. But it definitely frustrates me to see because you've got that sort of capture of the news by billionaires, you get less and less reporting on what's actually going on just because it benefits the billionaires for people to be ignorant. Um, and because the Democrats have kind of shitty messaging, you get people who can say both sides are the same because they fundamentally lack the information to know otherwise. When you've got grassroots movements that try and spread that information, but the platforms are just not even close to comparable. Especially when you've got Musk pushing anyone who isn't a Nazi off of Twitter. Uh, I'll say I had a Blue Sky account. I was never on Twitter. I left Facebook back in 2016. I made a Blue Sky account explicitly for promoting this stream. Definitely seems saner over there. But yeah, as far as the messaging, echo chambers are kind of an inherent thing in the internet. So you can be aware of that, you can work with it, you can fight it, but at some level, the fact that people are, anthropologically speaking, people are wired to deal with tribal issues. People are not wired to deal with global issues. So, okay, I can go ahead and uh, make a comment about, you know, confirmation bias and people seeking an in group. But at some level, we're wired like that, and it's not even inherently a bad thing. Um, it's just also sort of incompatible with modern living at some level. When you've got global issues going on that are complex and multifaceted, and the average person either doesn't know or doesn't care to know about the complexity of them, and yet are expected at some level to have an opinion on them. And it's like, okay, how do you feel about the ceasefire between Azerbaijan and Armenia that was just signed? Well, do you know the history of the Nagorno-Karabakh region that led up to this, and the fact that Azerbaijan just took that, and the fact that Azerbaijan kind of got turned on by Russia a little while back? And it's like, okay, probably you don't, because most people don't, and most people have no need to know. And at some level, like, yes, I would love to support Armenians. They've kind of let go of it the past century, frankly. But at some level, I have no way to materially support them. I could, you morally support them, but that's really value to someone who doesn't know they exist. And so we have these sort of global issues that people try and take tribal views on, and it leads to these sort of echo chambers where a lot of people, and I don't understand it personally. I am a pretty innately curious individual. I want to know more. I studied criminology and got my degree in anthropology. Like, people are weird. I want to know more about them. But there is a very clearly incurious segment of the population that wants only to have their beliefs validated. And because we're living in the second Gilded Age, give or take, a lot of these people are not doing well in life. They have problems, they have bills to pay, wages have stagnated significantly in the last 30 years, and a lot of them don't know why. So they look for someone to blame, and this sort of right wing media has an effect that they can go, hey, it's the immigrants that are taking all those jobs that, frankly, you don't want to do, but okay. Um, rather than, hey, hey, back in the 50s, we had a marginal tax rate of 90% over $1 million of income. And you know what we did with all that money? We built the federal highway system. We were in a position to do that because millionaires and the very few billionaires that existed at the time taxed what I would consider appropriately. They had all the money they needed to live quite comfortably, but they paid a share in taxes that allowed for great works like the federal highway system that hadn't been seen anywhere in the world before that. And so we had a booming economy, and then things got worse as we started outsourcing in the 80s, and Reagan cut a whole bunch of things, not the least of which was closing all the asylums and then not replacing them with anything. So mental health care for those who really, really needed it kind of went down the shitter. Now, I'm not also going to defend the asylum system. There were a lot of problems there, but at the very least, there were people who fundamentally couldn't exist well outside of it that were basically just pushed onto the street. Um, Add to that we had leaded gas in cars for until like 1986, I think it was finally outlawed. Uh, and a bunch of people in inner cities breathing in those fumes all the time, and we know that lead increases aggression and lowers IQ. And I know that IQ is a whole other thing and not the greatest measure, but at the very least, it measurably makes people dumber and more aggressive. Add to that all of the outsourcing of jobs and American factories closing down, um, and the stagnation of wages, and you've got people who get to these positions where they have lost money. They know that their standard of living is worse than that of their parents, but they don't know why because they're being drip fed this BS about, oh, it's the immigrants, oh, it's I don't know, the gay people, it's whatever. It's someone else's fault that your life is shit, and that's not wrong. The target's wrong. It's not the immigrants or the gay people or whatever else. It's the billionaires that are taking the time to uh, drip feed them this bullshit while they get greater and greater tax cuts and hoard more and more money than they could ever need in their life, or that even their grandchildren could need. Like, you just can't spend the amount of money that they have, but it's an addiction. They keep hoarding it. And so you get all these people that are mad about it, but are mad at the wrong target and are sold a quick and easy solution by a well known con man who gets himself elected president twice, stays out of jail, 34 felonies, etc. But it's people who are fed false information knowingly by billionaires, and frankly, I will never forgive Australia for giving us Rupert Murdoch. Um, they get points back for Samara weaving, and but that's largely unrelated. Um, but truly, it's an issue where the Democrats' messaging is shit. The Republicans' messaging is really good. Like evil, sure, but well done. Um, their propaganda machine is incredibly effective. And you could tell that it was incredibly effective round about 2020 when the election went down and a bunch of people started shitting on Fox News for being too leftist. And so they started watching OAN and Newsmax instead because I think the specific reason was Fox called Arizona for Biden when, you know, Biden won Arizona. But it really is that sort of problem where you're looking at a group of people who have problems, genuine problems in their lives, and they would like an easy answer And there is an easy answer, which is tax billionaires, but there are so many barriers in the way of that, given things like the Citizens United ruling and the various issues that come with even trying to face, someone with that kind of money in a political scale. Like, grassroots movements don't compete. Um, and so you've got people who are mad and they are given false targets, basically, by Republican propaganda. I'll say right wing propaganda. I don't. And so they believe then that A, someone who is not responsible for their problems is, and B, they are drip fed a whole bunch of culture war bullshit to keep them mad at the left. And like, to go back a few years, critical race theory was this huge Republican talking point on Fox News, and it's like they're gonna teach our elementary school kids critical race theory. It's like, A, that's a high level college course. No, they're not. B, when interviewed on the ground, a lot of people who were real mad about critical race theory could not express what it was. They just knew that someone said it on the TV and they were mad about it. And so it's these sorts of reactionary, emotionally angry, but not in any way critically curious groups of people that will get out and mobilize and vote. And so Democrats need to apply that to their messaging and determine that they need to get people to the polls. For the record, Hillary Clinton's Pokemon Go to the polls, not the correct answer. But they were, at the very least, trying to get people out to vote. And if Democrats can get that messaging down and go, hey, bullet points, here's the shitty things that elected Republicans have done in the past 4 years. Boom, 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 boom. They did all this. Uh, Here is what we tried to do, but were blocked from. Bullet points. You need to get out to vote to give us the opportunity to do the kinds of things on the bottom part of this list. I feel like I mean, look, I'm nobody's propaganda minister. I am not phenomenal at messaging. I can't say that I could turn the tide of votes in the U.S. God, I wish. But at some level, I'm like, you got to get the guy who's really good at this. And you saw it a little bit with Kamala Harris, where her press releases were clearly being written by Zoomer interns, where you're like, okay, if you're looking to appeal to a group of people to come out and vote, have people in that age bracket write the releases. Now, personally, I think you do several releases, and this was effectively something Shakespeare did, where he would write the same thing 3 times in a row at 3 levels of comprehension so that everybody in the crowd, regardless of their education, understood. And you kind of need to do that, I think, with political messaging, where you go, hey, here is the version for people that are super politically aware. Here is the version for people that know what they want but don't really follow politics. And here's the version for your low information voters. Like, here's your TikTok, like, whatever, short video. Here's why you need to get out of the polls. It's real important. And show, Republicans putting kids in cages in both Trump administrations at this point. Like, hey, this is why you need to get out to vote. Now, clearly, obviously, all this should have been done last November, but here we are. And to their credit, like, I've been bitching about Congress this evening, but at the very least, the judiciary seems to be holding at some level. Um, they blocked the removal of funds from U.S. aid. They are doing a generally good job at blocking the fire hose of illegal executive orders. Obviously, not as quickly as would be ideal, but the wheels of justice turn slow, mostly by design. Like I said, the Newsmax paying out 40 mil for the Dominion voting machines slander just happened now, 5 years later. So, well, 4 years later. Um, that is at some level to be expected. I mean, the problem is that the fascists are moving very quickly in Washington, trying to take power. And I mean, if you know anything about the history of Hitler seizing power, it took him 53 days. We are beyond that threshold, I believe, and Trump and his cronies have not consolidated power in quite the same way, purely because the judiciary is, for the moment, holding. And I'll say, as someone who was very, very concerned with the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett when that happened, she has actually been making some pretty sane calls for someone that is out of the religious cult that A Handmaid's Tale was based on. I was really genuinely concerned about where her votes were going to fall, but they've honestly been largely with the saner side. So, is everything falling apart? Kinda. Um, but at some level, the judiciary is holding to a reasonable degree. Obviously, when those things come out, Musk is out here shouting for the impeachment of judges that were lifetime appointed, and that would require a two-thirds majority in Congress, which nobody has, so not likely. Also, probably not a guy who fundamentally understands what impeachment is, if I had to guess, given that he was raised in South Africa and came to the U.S. illegally as an immigrant. So, I don't know. It's frustrating to watch, but it is heartening at some level to see the judiciary bouncing back. All the probationary employees now have to be rehired. Now, whether they get riffed beyond this point legally, um, at the very least, that the problem was they were all ostensibly fired with cause, which would make rehiring them into the federal government impossible, and is the kind of thing that you have to put on applications elsewhere. All of that was illegal. None of it was true. It wasn't an issue of uh, poor performance, which was what they were all fired for. And many of them had, positive performance reviews going back north of a decade. So that was illegal. At the very least, the judiciary said, hey, all those people need to be reinstated. So if they do get riffed beyond this point, it will A, be financially easier on them, because that comes with some benefits of its own. And they are theoretically priority rehires if the government needs some. Now, obviously, this organization is not, this regime is not looking to hire additional federal workers, but it puts them in a much better position. Now, how long will the judiciary hold? Will Congress do anything useful ever? Who knows? We live in hope, I suppose. But it is nice, at the very least, to wake up and see the judicial branch still maintaining a degree of checks and balances. Uh, I really would love to wake up in a timeline where I just didn't have to worry about this, or wake up, genuinely in 2021. One of my favorite things in late January was waking up and not immediately wondering what stupid thing my president had said on the world stage the previous night. Um, and to his credit, I will not say Biden was a perfect president, but he was, at his core, boring. And God, it was nice to have a boring politician in the White House again. It really, you don't appreciate how nice boring is until you get something that isn't. I mean, at some, I work at a gun range. When nothing is going wrong, it's boring. That's great. You want it boring. Um, that's kind of the crux of what I was feeling reading the news today. If anyone has any other topics, feel free. Otherwise, I can continue to iterate, but at some point, I'm probably going to start talking circles. I definitely, as usual, it's nice to see Bernie and AOC coming out with the correct takes, as far as I'm concerned, about what Democrats need to do and what the Constitution says. But, it's a question at some level of if anyone's listening, and years and years I've seen have not given me the impression that people are going to listen to them, which is frustrating. I believe that Bernie knows what he's doing. I'm terribly impressed by AOC. I'm really missing Jimmy Carter these days. Because while he was not a strong president, he was probably the best human to ever hold that office. Talk about a man who stuck to his ideals, um, and was in his 90s building homes for Habitat for Humanity. Fell over, massive bruise on his head, and there were pictures of him the next day with a big bandage, still out there with a nail gun, just making houses. Um, that got back when the emoluments clause mattered. Guy sold or put his peanut farm in a blind trust, with a guy who did not know what he was doing and came out of the presidency $1 million poorer because the guy had mismanaged his farm that badly in 4 years. And I was sort of morbidly amused that it wasn't even a question in Trump's second swing into office, or in the 2024 campaign. Because in 2016 it was, are you going to put Trump Tower and various other properties that make money Mar-a-Lago into a blind trust? And it was clear that A, he had no fucking idea what a blind trust was, and B, no, he wasn't. And so the fact that no reporters even asked him in 2024 was sort of sickeningly amusing to me. But I'd love for basic boring laws like that to matter. Because I mean, even in his first term, you had uh, the Saudis and the Russians renting out whole floors of his hotel to be empty just so they could funnel money directly to an American president. And like, even if it weren't a huge conflict of interest, not a good look. Like, clearly not a man who cares much about bad looks, but not a good look. Um, and so it's frustrating to see that sort of thing repeated, along with I remember him taking his golfing trips and charging, like, making secret security stay in rooms at Mar-a-Lago and charging them like triple the standard rate because that money just went straight into his pockets. I don't know. it would be nice to live in a place where laws mattered at some level, but clearly that is no longer my home. I'd like to change that back, but have little to no idea of where to really start. I there is a degree of despair coming that comes with just reading the news day to day, feeling powerlessness uh, because of the various enumerated issues, but just at some level knowing that the problem is 45 minutes down the road from me and there's nothing I can do about it. But I don't know. I'm I don't know, frustrated, I guess, is the word to sum it up. Nothing much I can do, and more and more seems to go wrong day to day. And that's the real problem. Is there's a term for it. Fire hose of something. Basically, the idea of misinformation, and a fire hose of falsehood. That's it. Where basically they're spewing so much bullshit that by the time you've refuted point number one, they are on point number 17, and A, nobody's listening to you refute them because the people who agree with you already know it's bullshit, and the people who don't know don't want to know, um, and they're going to agree with whatever Trump says or, Fox News tells them to agree with. And there's shockingly to me, and this is the thing, right? As politics get more and more divided, the thing that shocks me are the people that are ostensibly centrist, um, because there were people in the run up to the 2024 election who didn't know who they were going to vote for, and that's the one that I just can't quite wrap my head around. Like, all right, you want fascistic tendencies? Clear choice for president. You want hatred on, immigrants, gay people, whoever else that you hate? Clear choice for president. You want some semblance of sanity. You want, the rule of law to hold at some level. Clear choice for president. And so it's the people in the middle that just like I don't know what they want. And I don't know that they know what they want. But it's people that are like I can't choose who to vote for that I don't get. And I think it's a simple low information diet thing where I talked about, echo chambers, and you've got issues with that primarily on the right, but there are certainly left-leaning ones. Um, and you get that problem where people get in that information loop and confirmation bias, where they're only reading things that people who agree with them are writing. But then also fundamentally, you've got this whole other subset of people who don't have any clue and clearly don't want to because, like, okay, if you lived in the Ozarks in the 1930s, like, all right, you're miles from your nearest neighbor. You don't have a paper boy. You're not getting the news day to day. Maybe you get the news when you go into town. Somebody's, put something through the local telegraph office. And like, all right, fair. You don't have the information. But anybody in the US probably has a smartphone, and at the very least, probably has internet access. So I don't understand the incuriosity of people to never check what either side is going with. And I guess at some level, it's a privilege thing, right? Like, there are people in this country who that sort of racism, sexism, homophobia are less likely to touch, and that's white dudes. So, sure, okay, I get that you've lived, say if you're my age, you've lived through a bunch of presidents that fundamentally didn't really change what was going on with your life. But I mean, Donald Trump, the sexism was right out there in the open. You had the Access Hollywood tape. You had people who were saying, like, hey, this guy's a creep. Hey, I worked with him. He's crazy. Don't go this way. Um, and so you would think that women would see that as like a red flag, but there were a shocking number who voted for him three times now. Um, and so I don't know if that's primarily a thing where they hate immigrants slash gay people slash trans people enough that they're like, okay, I can take the hit, or if they just think that they're above the hit, they don't think it's going to affect them. And I don't know the answer. It's clear that there's something about Trump that is charismatic. It turns me off immediately when I hear him talk, but clearly it gets crowds going. I don't understand because just the slightest amount of research into the man would tell you why he's a terrible choice to be in charge of any money ever. But there were people, even to the 2024 election, who didn't know who they were going to vote for a month out from November. And I don't understand. I guess the more we have the internet, the more it's possible to live in your own bubble. And it's not a problem until the troops are coming over the hill, I guess. Uh, or maybe, people see the news the way I do. Man, that shit's depressing. And instead of going in because I feel like I need to, they're like, well, I'm just not going to read it. Which I think is kicking the can down the road, but there you are. Um, so I think we are approaching the find out stage pretty rapidly at this point. And there are going to be a lot of people who either sat out the election or just I mean that if I'm honest, those were the ones that really pissed me off in the fall. Is like, okay, if you voted for Harris, great. If you voted for Trump, I firmly disagree with you, but it's clear that we are ideologically incompatible, and that was probably the case from day one. There's probably nothing I could have said to change your mind. Fair. It's the people who just didn't bother to show up, and the something like 8 million who showed up for Biden and then didn't show up for Harris. And it's, was it purely an undercurrent of sexism and or racism? I don't know. But the people that just didn't feel the need to show up are the ones that really frustrate, piss me off, like, whatever. And what I failed to understand is how anybody who was reading the news at all in the lead up to the election would conceive of sitting it out. And I don't understand, but that's I'll start talking in circles if I keep going on that. Point was, congressional Democrats are in a tough position at the moment. They don't have the kind of majority needed to resist. Congressional Republicans are rolling over and ceding their power, and there's just not a whole lot that can be done about that. From our end, anyway. Um, I don't know. It's disappointing day to day. And like, I'm not a guy who ever had a ton of faith in Democrats to come through for me, but too many years of disappointment on that one. But it would be nice to see them fighting harder than a fucking ping pong paddle. I don't know. Anybody in the chat, if you've got a topic of conversation, I'd love to pivot because I feel like I don't know, going in circles, spiraling something. Um, but anyway, I think my streamer's mood today thing is that's I would love to not see us make the mistakes of Chamberlain. I would love to see people stand up to the fascists before we get to mass deaths. Um, because particularly with someone like RFK in charge of Health and Human Services, measles is not being treated with the seriousness it needs to be. Avian flu is not being treated with the seriousness it needs to be, and avian flu at this point has transmitted to rats, which is a huge problem because rats are a compatible enough mammalians with humans that mutations that can pass it from rats to us is fairly likely, and B, they breed and die rapidly. So I am concerned at this point that we are a month or two away from enough cycles and mutations that it's going to transfer from rats to us. And I mean, how big a problem is that really? Have there ever been any plagues based on rats before? I don't think so. I think we're safe, probably, probably fine. Um, I don't know. I think we saw how this administration handled a plague last time around. I think the fact that we've got two brewing, and I mean measles. Measles is particularly bad in the sense that we are looking at a a disease that, if airborne, can infect someone for something like 24 hours in the same space. Uh, it is a disease that removes your immunity to other diseases if you catch it, and it doesn't kill you. Um, so hypothetically, you could get chickenpox, then measles, then chickenpox again. Uh, so that I mean that one's terrifying. And as someone, I mean, I had an MMR vaccine as a kid, um, so I hope that works. But the thing about vaccines is that they're not 100% effective. You rely on herd immunity, and so this group of Mennonites in Texas decided they were anti-vax and they didn't want to, vax their kids, and now it's all of our problem. So hopefully, the people in your area have gotten their vaccines and the herd immunity keeps us all safe. But I have real concerns for how measles is going to spread, particularly with, modern air travel. I know that while it started in Texas, there was a case detected in Dulles Airport um, that I think wound up in Maryland. So it's spreading. Well, hopefully, you know, I I mean clearly this administration's going to either ignore it or do some insane shit about it, like tell us to inject bleach. So hopefully the people in your area can start a grassroots movement to mask and various other things once it starts spreading more rapidly, but I don't know. That and avian flu are going to be really nasty in the next year or so. Uh, the guy in charge of Health and Human Services is an anti vaxxer who has literally had part of his brain eaten by a worm that then died there. That's still in his skull, so that's, exciting. Cod liver oil and vitamin A for measles. Yes, yeah, I saw that. Cod liver oil was actually funny to me because that's like an ancient folk medicine thing, and it's always funny to see where anti-vaxxers fall because it it seems to be either very far right or very far left. You get the like super crunchy yoga moms that are terrified of vaccines, and the like hard right Jehovah's Witnesses who are like no impurities in the body kind of thing, no injections, no blood transfusions, that sort of thing. Uh, and I mean, both sides are clearly wrong, but yeah, cod liver oil and vitamin A, like, are they gonna hurt? Probably not. Are they gonna help? Almost certainly not. Particularly when we have things like masks. That I mean, that was the Surgeon General last time around was like, "Oh no, we don't know for sure that masks work, so we're not going to recommend them." When it's like, there's no harm in recommending masks. And I think at the time it was them being terrified of masks getting bought up en masse while they were trying to stockpile. But yeah, definitely frustrating to see that guy in charge of human health. And we kind of saw this last time when some coal baron got put at the head of the EPA. It's like, well, clearly they're there to destroy it, regulatory capture and all that. But I don't understand fundamentally how that works with human health. Like, you can't keep the peasants down and steal all their money through taxes if they're dead. It's not a great long-term business plan, you know? So I would love to see, like, he did, to his credit, at least send 2,000 vaccines to Texas. Now that's nowhere near what is necessary to meet the demand, but you know, the anti-vaxxer sent some vaccines, so that's at least a little progress. It's my hope that he will begin to notice and take seriously these sorts of things, as you saw in the first Trump campaign. The individual whose name escapes me, who was put as head of the Department of Energy, went in with that same sort of, break it down, tear it down mindset, and then learned what the Department of Energy does and how many nuclear weapons it oversees, and went, this shit's real important. We should maybe not break any of it, which I'm sure pissed off whoever put him in power. But I'm hoping that the clearly somewhat insane RFK Jr. sees the light a bit, and understands the fundamental importance of not having everyone on his watch die. I, I don't know if that'll happen, but here's hoping. Yeah, it's always fascinating to see what the recommendations are for treating things when there's like a clearly medically proven cure, but they're like, no, we should inject bleach or smoke some sage or whatever. It's like, why? but but we have a thing and we know it works, and I know that you're fundamentally anti-intellectual and opposed to science and shit, but do you want to die? Because this is a real good way to do it. I mean, back to Herman Cain, like, guy died denying COVID existed. Fuck, he tweeted from beyond the grave that he didn't die of COVID. I assume that was somebody in his immediate vicinity, but he did in fact send. There was a tweet on Herman Cain's Twitter account that went out after his death denying COVID. Um, and I just, like, of all the things to get up in arms about and to be opposed to, it's like human health seems like the one where you go, okay, hey, maybe let's trust the experts. And I understand, and Asimov said it right about the threat of anti-intellectualism in America, but why do people want other people to die or themselves to die just because they want to feel like they were smarter than the people who spent decades studying this shit? And I mean, you saw that against Fauci last time around. Like, people fucking hated him for being, an expert in his field and telling us how to not die. And the celebration of being opposed to him and burning masks in 55-gallon drums outside of state houses. It's like I I don't understand that sort of opposition to reason. And we were talking about the sort of right wing propaganda machine earlier, and I understand that that was stoking people, but it's a fucking disease. It doesn't care about your politics. At some level, it doesn't matter what you think, like whether or not you believe it's real, it's here. And you get the same thing with climate change, where they're like, oh no, it's a hoax. And you're like, but all of this data, and they're like, no, hoax. Sorry, might cut out there. And so you get people who are staring down the barrel of these problems. Now, you get politicians denying that climate change is a thing, and I almost kind of get that because we've got a ton of geriatrics in there, and they'll be dead by the time it's a real problem. By the time the water wars have started, most of them will be out. But for the younger people that fall into that mindset, it's like you've watched the world change around you. You know it's different than when you were a kid. Um, and it fascinates me to see people trusting the propaganda machine over the evidence of their eyes and ears. I mean, that that was Orwell. The they told you to deny the evidence of your eyes and ears. That was their final, most essential command. Um, I really wish that 1984 wasn't so relevant to my life. Makes me feel like all my English teachers were right, you know? Um, Actually, funny enough, I read Orwell after school. I did not get that in high school. Should have. Read some Vonnegut, but never, never Orwell. Seems like important reading these days. That and Huxley's Brave New World. That's I actually considered setting up a Discord for this channel. Might do like a book club kind of channel in there somewhere if people are interested. Um, but I definitely would like to focus on something that isn't the news day in day out. So probably some fiction in there. See if people who are here are into fantasy, sci-fi, whatever. Hell, maybe some good historical fiction. I would be down for a distraction, if nothing else. Um, and that's, I mean, I'll say, I'll put this out there. I am physically disabled for the last 8.5 years. I got injured at a job. I was very fortunate that I was at a job so that I have workers' comp at least covering the long term treatment. But it was nerve damage leads to, I mean, I'm still walking on a cane these days, but I definitely, watching fascists rise to power, am acutely aware that among the first targets of the Nazis for the death camps were physically disabled individuals, cripples. Um, and I have some concern about that because, like, otherwise I fit the not in terrible danger mold, white male, relatively clean, um, straight, the the stuff that wouldn't get you sent to the chambers. But I am aware that that was a target last time around, and it would not shock me if it was a target this time around. I keep waiting to hear rumblings of the Supreme Court messing with the ADA, and fortunately I haven't yet, but again, fire hose of falsehood. It's exceptionally difficult to keep up with everything the regime is doing day to day. At least a little bit by design. Um, I think it was Andor, one of the characters in the show Andor on Disney Plus talked about how they can hide better behind 40 atrocities than a single incident, and it certainly seems to be true. Andor was incredible television. For anyone who's not seen it, it's actual anti-fascist art on Disney Plus, which is hilarious if you know anything about Walt Disney. That also speaks out against cultural genocide, which is also hilarious if you know anything about Disney. But I definitely recommend it, especially in these times. Um, I'm certainly looking for more art of that sort of bent. I don't know if it's to give me hope or a false sense of security. I really don't. I would love to see more action being taken in Washington. I would love to see more grassroots. And to be fair, there are actual protests happening all over the country that are broadly not being reported by news. But I'm seeing, handheld video on Reddit of like tens of thousands of people marching in deep red states. Like, saw a huge protest in Utah. Saw something in Oklahoma. But you're not seeing major news agencies reporting on it in the same way that a lot of those protests were covered in 2020 when things were going on in the wake of George Floyd's death, that sort of thing. So I think there are grassroots movements, but I think that there's very little. Thank you for the follow, Evan. Um, I think there's very little that is going to happen outside of various social media apps. I don't think the news is going to be the big turning point for that. I think there's room for grassroots movements to pop up, but I think that communication is going to have to be handled very carefully, particularly if you're organizing in a place like Twitter or Facebook. Um, those companies are owned by people that are opposed to that sort of movement and can actively suppress it, as they've proven time and again. Um, so, Blue Sky, WhatsApp, see what you can manage, I suppose. At this point, I am hopeful that those sort of movements will give rise to something positive, but I'm reminded again and again that while Dr. King had a very peaceful message in the 1960s, I don't believe that white Americans would have been quite so eager to accept that message as would as they were if not for the specter of Malcolm X looming in the background as an alternative. Because you had Dr. King, who was a very peaceful man, wanted to create change through civil uh, protest, while Malcolm X was a man who was prepared for violence. And I think a lot of Americans at that time were much more willing to hear Dr. King's message with that alternative looming. And I just don't know to what degree peaceful grassroots protests can succeed with all of the barriers between money being funneled to politicians by billionaires. How do you change a politician's behavior with a peaceful protest? I mean, Occupy Wall Street was denigrated by various things, various news organizations rather, the whole time it was happening, was their attempt at a peaceful protest, and just didn't have any real long-term effects, which was frustrating to watch in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And then I talked about objecting to Obama bombing significant chunks of the Middle East, but honestly, my biggest objection to his time in office was bailing out the banks. I mean, personally, like, okay, if you're of the opinion that the banks need to continue existing for the average American, fine. You go, okay, we're bailing you out. We're also nationalizing you. Your bank is now government property. Congratulations. Get the fuck out. And I think failing to do that was one of the biggest mistakes that was made while he was in office. I think taking companies that had just lost billions and lost people their homes, because that was the thing, right? The banks got bailed out. They got billions of dollars. Now, granted, those were loans, and the banks did pay them back over time. That's the counterpoint that always comes up when you talk about the banks getting bailed out. And yeah, that's true. But the banks got bailed out. The people whose homes were being foreclosed on didn't. Now, if he had gone and said, "Hey, cool, we're nationalizing the bank, and we're refinancing all these mortgages for people that did not qualify for their mortgages, so that we aren't leaving a whole bunch of people homeless or kicking them out of homes that they otherwise believed that they could purchase because your bank told them so." Um, and I think failing to do that was a major misstep in that administration. And I'm aware that the history of actually nationalizing things in the U.S. is relatively uncommon. Um, Far more common in other countries where you get something. I, I, I mean, I'll use SpaceX as an example. Elon Musk made SpaceX, and they're getting contracted out by NASA to do a bunch of shit. In a lot of countries, that would be grounds for, hey, this is really important. We need it. We're nationalizing your company. Here's your payout. And all the people who work for you are now going to work for the government. Which makes a lot of Americans very twitchy. Sort of understandably. I mean, I get, you know, how eminent domain is regularly abused to force poor people out of their homes for, things like railroads, roads, whatever else. I understand the innate twitchiness there, but I think that the worst of all of those options was just bailing out the banks and going, "Oh, you made a mistake. Here's absolute fuckloads of money again." Uh, I and then watching, homelessness numbers climb because all those people were getting foreclosed on because they could never make the payments that the bank told them that they could make. So, privatize the profits, socialize the losses, I suppose. Seems to be the general habit. It's tough to watch. It's frustrating to watch homelessness numbers rise when you've got companies like BlackRock buying up all of the properties to landlord over them. People talk about a housing shortage. It doesn't exist. There are enough houses for everybody in the US. A lot of them are sitting empty right now, or apartments are sitting empty right now because companies like BlackRock bought them and jacked the prices up so that nobody could afford them. So they're sitting on a bunch of empty properties making no money on them But because they've got billions of dollars, they can afford to let them sit there and not make money off them. They don't need a rapid turnover on that kind of thing in the same way that someone who flips houses does. Um, but you've got a rising homelessness problem that, again, I think this is a situation ripe for nationalization where you go, hey, BlackRock, that's a neat investment firm you got there. We are taking it and all of the properties. Here's your payout. Leave. And then you use those houses for Section 8 housing, that kind of thing, where you've got people who can't afford regular houses and get government subsidized housing. Now, obviously, this administration not real worried about the little guy, so I don't see that happening soon, but it's one of those things that could be happening in a country that cared about making the lives of its citizens better. But every time I look, I double check and it doesn't seem we're living in that one. Um, which isn't to say, every other nation's perfect. I tend to say, if I were to live in a country that I felt, cared about me as a human being, probably Western or Northwestern Europe would be where I'd wind up. And you've got people in Grindavik, Iceland, who had basically volcano tunnels open up under their homes, and they left because they were forced to evacuate. But the government refused to, and as far as I know, has still refused to uh, condemn the houses, basically, which would allow them to collect an insurance payout. So as far as the insurance companies are concerned, those houses are still standing there. The people just aren't allowed to go to them, and so they're stuck in this sort of in between space where, again, I feel the government is failing to step in for the betterment of the people. And it would be nice to see, because Grindavik was something like 3,500 people at the time that the volcano tubes opened up. And it just doesn't seem like that huge a step for the government to step in and go, hey, all those houses are condemned, insurance payout now, which they could do. Um, I don't know. Denmark is still the one that blows my mind, where they have 10 weeks of paid vacation annually by law. Unrelated, Denmark is considered to be the happiest nation on earth. Possibly related. Possibly related. But the world over, the belts are getting tighter because billionaires and mega corporations are buying up, uh, paying for laws to be tailored to them as they like it. And it's getting worse and worse for the average individual. And to be clear, it certainly has not helped that in the past century we have doubled the population on the planet. I mean, when my dad was born, there were 4 billion people on the planet. There are now over 8. Um, and that it's a number that the human brain really can't fully comprehend. But at the very least, you're looking at doubling the number of people vying for resources on the planet, which is accelerating climate change. And people talk about, people freak out when they hear that people are having kids at below replacement levels, and I'm like, man, the world's probably better off with like 3 billion people. And you don't have to do anything about that. You can just not have kids for a bit and we'll get there. But the growth is fundamentally unsustainable. There are a finite number of resources on Earth, and the more people we add to it, the greater the problem becomes. Overpopulation is one of the greatest contributing factors to climate change, and it's the one least talked about. I mean, people talk about using different kinds of energy. You got solar, you got wind, you got nuclear. I know I could rant on this one for a while, but thorium is the one that I feel we should have invested in years ago. Um, Thorium is a radioactive element that is capable, theoretically, of taking a nuclear power plant from nuclear power plant size to the size of like a house in a suburban neighborhood. It only outputs alpha waves, unlike uranium. Uranium puts out gamma waves, which can punch a hole in a sheet of lead, like several inches of lead. Uh, Alpha waves can't get through unbroken human skin, so if it were to melt down, it would uh, not even probably cause enormous health problems. The only problem with thorium is that in order to get it to go critical to power that sort of reactor, you need to have it in a bath of molten salt. Now, the tiny problem with molten salt is that it's corrosive as fuck. So, getting a container that can hold molten salt is a bit of a problem. Now, were people applying research money to this, I suspect they could have figured it out by now. But the people who own uranium mines and have interests in keeping uranium as the relevant thing keep lobbying against it, which frankly I don't get. Like, you're billionaires. Just buy all the thorium mines. You'll still be rich. It's fine. But no, they are inherently conservative about any change in the industry, so we don't get to have nice things. Uh, Now, that said, we do still need a breakthrough on thorium to make the molten salt thing viable, but on the whole, it is a feasible replacement for our nuclear energy and incredibly safer than uranium. It's one of those where if someone stole thorium to make a bomb, like a dirty bomb, it wouldn't matter because as long as people aren't wandering around with massive open wounds, the alpha particles aren't getting in anyway. But that's a whole other issue. But it would be nice to see overpopulation included in that discussion. Now, people don't do that because people have kids and those people vote. And so it's unpopular to say, hey, little Timmy's contributing to the problem. And I understand why politicians don't do that. I honestly, I get that one. Fair. But it is a problem that needs to be discussed. And it makes me laugh every time someone's like, oh, millennials aren't having kids and zoomers aren't having kids. It's like, well, yeah, you made a fundamentally incompatible economy with child rearing. Ain't nobody can afford a kid. But also, it's not a problem if the population starts trending down. Like, it is in the short term, like, there are social programs that become a problem. China is having an issue where the one child program, led to them having like 30 million more men than women, which is leading to a rise of like incels in China, which is a whole other thing. But also, they had fewer kids than they had old people, and so the old people are now becoming a strain on the system, and there are fewer workers to make the money. So I'm not saying there are no problems with the population going down, but in the long term, as far as remaining on this planet, you kind of need the population to trend downwards because otherwise we eat up all the resources, and if we haven't gotten off planet, if we don't have a manual backup of humanity, we're done. And, you know, we will have kind of done it to ourselves. Now, I also don't want to, blame the average everyday person for climate change in that way. We are aware that there are 20 companies producing 80% of the world's carbon output. So it's not as though the average person can just, recycle better and have that change occur. But at some level, it's it, humans are causing the problem through overconsumption of resources. Now, is that primarily a corporate issue? Sure. Are people consuming those products? Also, yes. Uh, and the more people you got, the more people that consume, more demand you got for the product, more carbon output you get. And so long as we are reliant on primarily fossil fuels, be that coal or oil, to get that stuff done, um, we got a real problem when we start running dry. Which is where things like alternative nuclear power, wind, solar, etc., are a good plan to improve what we've got going on. Um, and solar has improved actually. I was seeing an article sometime last year on the solar panels they put on some satellite that were self-repairing because they knew that solar radiation would punch holes in it over time because it always does. Um, but they made basically a self-repairing uh, satellite, which is super cool. And if that tech can be applied to ground-based ones, it'll be at least less replacement overall. Whether we can successfully transition to that with the current administration seems unlikely, to get solar or wind going anywhere. Especially, I mean, Donald Trump's got a whole thing against wind farms since his battle in Scotland about wind farm near his golf resort. Seems to have taken it personal. Not that he has a history of that or anything. Um, but eh, that sort of power is a positive short-term step, but I think overpopulation as a whole is going to be the bigger question in the long run. We are still having children at a greater than replacement level as a species. It's certainly slowed down, um, but until it sort of starts to go in reverse, I don't see any of these problems improving significantly. Um, I'm hopeful for wind and solar. I really think those are positive steps, but I also think they're stopgap measures. Um, I think we've done enough damage that the equator is going to become a desert. Um, the real problem there is going to be water. Our next major problem becomes water filtration, because we do currently have the ability to turn salt water into drinking water by removing the salt. But then you run into the problem of where you put the salt, because if you put it back in the ocean, you're creating a massive dead zone. Um, it'll just make the water like super super salty and unlivable for coral or fish or whatever. If you put it on land, you then have the issue where it gets into your groundwater, um, and you also add to the fact that removing the salt from the water is a whole process in and of itself that requires a fair amount of power. So I think some of that will be attempted at the equator, but I don't know how effective it's going to be. And then you're going to get people moving north and south from the equator to get to more hospitable climes, which is going to cause a whole other refugee crisis. And it's my hope that, governments will react well to that, but I kind of doubt it. So who knows? I am I know, beacon of sunshine as always, but I would love to see people learn from history. Uh, it would make me happy for people to give me the impression that they learned a thing and are not going to repeat a mistake that I know that they're going to repeat. Um, Not that I'm, immune to that kind of thing, but having studied history, it's definitely frustrating to see people who haven't go ahead and take steps that you know are going to end badly. Um, Particularly with things like the rise in fascism in the world. I mean, my God, uh, Maloney, the PM for Italy, she is so clearly fascist, and fascism rising in Italy is historically bad. Um, for her too, if it follows the natural course. Um, but I don't know. I'd really like to think that there's going to be and you know what? Honestly, a positive note. There has been a positive shift. Um, Canada, since the U.S. inauguration, not even the election, but the inauguration, has shifted significantly leftward. Um, and their Trumpish candidate, Pierre Polivar, has lost a lot of ground to, I want to say the guy's name is Mark Hawley, the replacement for Trudeau. The more leftist candidate has gained a significant amount of support, basically because Canadians do not want to see what's going on in Washington happening in Canada, which is nice to see that other people can learn from our mistakes at least. I don't know. Kind of hurts to still be stuck over here, but it's maybe a positive step for humanity as a whole. Um, Learning from other countries' mistakes. I don't know. I did see actually Duterte just got arrested. Um, the former Philippine uh, president, PM president, I think, um, was just arrested by the ICC for crimes against humanity in his quote unquote war on drugs that was really just killing all the quote unquote undesirables, along with probably some random drug runners that they didn't care all that much about. But he was arrested, so, positive steps there. I'd love to see more of that, more world leaders arrested for shit that they did wrong, but I'll take it as a start. There's always further steps that would be positive. I don't know. What else did I read? Did I read any good news? Let's see, real quick. Give me just a moment. Da, da, da. Oh yeah. Oh, excellent. Mark Carney, who I was just talking about, was just sworn in as Canada's PM after Trudeau stepped down. So my point was apparently just a little behind. Yeah, excellent news. Mark Carney's in there. I'm hoping he will continue taking a hard line against Trump, because frankly, the absurd back and forth on tariffs is really frustrating to watch as an American. I can't imagine how it is as a Canadian. I did learn an amusing fact the other day regarding Canada, um, which is that Canada, as a country, gained its independence in 1982. I did not know it was that young as an independent country. kind of amusing to me. But like, I knew it was sometime in the 1900s. I just didn't think it was that late. Um, I don't know. Anything else fun? I could go for fun. No, man, none of these headlines are fun. Weird. The news is usually so upbeat. No, man, all that's super negative. Cool. Anywho, um, yeah, let's see. What would I love to see? I would love to see increases in literature. I would love to see more support for librarians. I did sign a online petition, which I know means absolutely nothing at all, but threw my name on there for a school district across the country that was trying to ban a bunch of books, and there was a thing that opposed them, a online petition. They were looking for like 10,000 signatures, and I was one of them. So not not a huge step. I know that signing an online petition is just genuinely meaningless, but I don't know. Feels like I did a little something. Love to be able to support librarians more publicly, but to be perfectly honest, I'm fortunate enough to live in an area where most of that bullshit isn't happening. It's not like most of our librarians. I'm sure they're getting like hate messages from local idiots, but those local idiots at least don't have the power to start burning books or getting them out of the library. So, positives where we can find them. I definitely would like to see a greater groundswell of support for librarians across the country, but they've been demonized by various right wing media, so I don't know. Also, I'd like to see support for librarians just because they do good work in their communities, keeping, books, internet, etc. available to people who might not otherwise have access, which is part of what makes seeing them demonized so irritating, frustrating, enraging on occasion. But I don't know. There's relatively little I feel I can do day to day, so the occasional online petition is something. Participate in various, Defeat Project 2025 subreddit, the couple of others, Capital Consequences, which is just a sad subreddit now that all the insurrectionists got pardoned. There are still occasional things that pop up because the kind of people that tried to do an insurrection for Donald Trump aren't generally the brightest. So a bunch of them keep getting imprisoned or killed. Um, to nobody's shock, I suppose. If you're in chat and know of a equivalent historical event, because I would think that the January 6th insurrection would be sort of equivalent to the beer hall putsch in Germany, um, where again, once he got in, he kind of moved people out of trouble for that one. Or maybe the Reichstag. No, no, the Reichstag fire is gonna be whenever they try and declare martial law. Um, which, to be clear, was outlined in Project 2025. They want to do that, whether like regardless of what the instigating thing is that they use as the excuse. The plan is to do that. So that'll be either their false flag, like the Reichstag fire, or an actual thing when they push people far enough. Um, though again, I'm somewhat impressed that the judiciary is holding up to some degree, so they're not able to push through everything that they want to. Oh, in hilarious news today, um, JD Vance and his wife got booed heavily at the Kennedy Center last night, and the current head of the Kennedy Center called for understanding and diversity and inclusion, um, which is bullshit because it's about political ideals, not immutable physical or psychological characteristics. But also, uh, calling for DEI now seems kind of short-sighted, hypocritical, something. I'd like, yeah, I'd like ideological consistency, but I don't anticipate it for sure. I am. It is heartening to see JD Vance getting booed by crowds everywhere he goes. That is my only sort of source of hope, is that the party will collapse in on itself if Trump ever keels over, just because he is the cult of personality. I don't see Vance garnering any kind of support of that nature. I think the Night of Long Knives will commence pretty much immediately after that, when some people will get purged, but I don't know who's going to come out on top. And whoever it is, I don't think that they're going to have the kind of support that Trump does. I don't think. I think the cult of personality is too strongly around the man for anyone to come in and take over and to expect that kind of support. I'll be really interested to see if he dies in office, what the following events are. Just because, there are a lot of old people and there are a lot of fat people. There just aren't a lot of old fat people. And Trump is both. So, given that he's pushing 80, I don't see him lasting too long, though, given that he's got the best healthcare in the country, who knows? And, I mean, my God, what they did to Feinstein after her stroke was ghoulish enough. Just rolling her into the congressional house with clearly no idea what's going on. That was. I didn't like Feinstein, but Christ, that was just gross. Ah, pardon me just a moment. I'm gonna stretch here. All right. Um, let's see. Potential topics. This is ADH discussions. I should have something else on hand. Oh, there we go. That's news. U.S. stock market loses $5 trillion in value in 3 weeks. That's impressive. Though, admittedly, is one of those numbers that just means nothing because you just genuinely can't comprehend what 5 trillion is. went from 52.06 trillion to 46.78 trillion in 3 weeks. It's kind of the reverse Hitler, if I'm honest. Hitler pulled the Weimar Republic out of an incredible depression following World War One. Trump seems to be pushing us deep into the depression, and the was it something Hawley tariffs under Hoover that led to the Great Depression. And so watching those same kind of tariffs get put in place are definitely concerning, particularly as someone who already doesn't have a lot of money. Uh, I would definitely like to see more backing off the tariffs, less waffling back and forth over what the tariffs are going to be. More just going, hey, this was maybe a bad call, but I'm well aware that Trump lacks that level of introspection capability. And so the narcissistic double down, double down, double down is gonna go bad. Exactly how bad, yet to be seen. Um, though I certainly don't expect that stock market drop to stop. Uh, it'll be an interesting, in the Chinese sense, time for the next bit, however long this lasts. So I think, yeah, Mike, I think you're the only one in here at the moment. Um, so if you want to try and figure out what's up with your Twitch account, I'd be more than happy to do that with you. Is it just a sign-in issue, or is that not working? Till then, um, I would. I don't know. Anybody got thoughts on something other than politics? I'm inclined to kind of push elsewhere. Let's see. I've got discussing history, news, science, politics as the title. Do I have any science that we can discuss? I would be genuinely interested to see if there's anything relevant to that, because I could do with some scientific breakthroughs. Make me feel a little less like everything's on fire. Oh, hey, Native American suicide rate dropped 43% in New Mexico. Not a scientific breakthrough, but good news. Cougar cubs spotted in Michigan wild for the first time in 100 years. Excellent. New Mexico covers tuition to any resident with a high school diploma or GED. That's genuinely progressive. I'm shocked, but that's awesome. Uh, Oregon to raise legal minimum marriage age to 18. That's great, though I'm a little concerned about how many people are just going to move to Idaho. Uh, UK emissions fell to the lowest level since 1872 last year. Awesome. Mediterranean monk seals make remarkable return from the brink of extinction. That's cool. Study confirms that solar farms can reverse desertification. That's very cool. I'd be interested to see how. Yes, I'm sure that your site does have cookies. So, Catalan Desert alter soil conditions, encourage vegetation growth, and reshape the local climate. That is interesting because generally the concern is that you get a bit of desertification with solar panels. But yeah, I suppose if you can reverse it, that's awesome. Missouri Senate overwhelmingly approves child marriage ban. That, way to go, Missouri. You don't say that often, but way to go, Missouri. Usually it's all shit, Missouri. Man lives for 100 days with artificial titanium heart in successful new trial. That's cool. Nice to know we at least get some cyborgs in our cyberpunk future. I don't know. Ah, okay, did I? Okay. Sorry, I bumped my table. I was concerned I unplugged my mic. Okay. So, any other topics from the chat, from anything? I can do other topics. We can do games. Okay, a bunch of stuff about Assassin's Creed Shadows. I don't actually care until I see how it is. I personally have not pre-ordered an Assassin's Creed since I got burned on Unity back in like 2012, 2013. Probably 2013, I think. But yeah, I'm good. If it's good, I'll totally check it out. But ooh, Brandon Sanderson's top 10 video games. Pretty sure Elden Ring's at the top of the list. Katamari Damacy, Undertale, Fallout New Vegas, good call. Super Mario World, Curse of Monkey Island, good call. Breath of the Wild, good call. Halo 2, nice. Final Fantasy X. I have never played any of the Final Fantasy games to completion. Just not a series for me. Bloodborne, good call. And Civ 6. Alright, nice. For those who don't know, I am a big fan of Brandon Sanderson, so definitely interested in what he's what he considers good games. I also know he was a huge fan of the Arcane series, which is nice to know. Space Marine 3 is officially in development. Solid news for Warhammer enjoyers all over the world. see, any anthropology news? I try to keep up. I don't always succeed. Genomic study indicates our capacity for language emerged 135,000 years ago. That's interesting. How did they get there? Human language, 135 million. Language might have entered social use 100,000 years ago. What is this based on, though? Logic's very simple. Every population branching across the globe has human language, and all languages are related. Divergence of early human populations. We can say with a fair amount of certainty the split occurred 135,000 years ago. So human language capacity must have been present then or before. Examines 15 genetic studies of different varieties published over the past 18 years, used data about inherited Y chromosome, 3 examined mitochondrial DNA, 9 whole genome studies. Okay. So certainly not a small sample size. Yeah, impressive. Uh, Western Europe's oldest human face discovered in Spain. What do they mean by face? That is certainly a choice of phrasing. I would be interested to know where that goes. How did you get a face? 1994, unearthed remains, Homo ancestor, TD6 level, right? Yeah, sure. 100,000 years ago. Homo ancestor, surprisingly modern looking face. Jawbone, 1891, primitive features. Don't use the term primitive. I know it's common, but it's got such a negative history in anthropology. It's not a good look. Too fragmentary to be assigned to any species or even confirm or rule out belonging to Homo ancestor. Okay, so very little in the way of actual news on that one. Aztec origins and the founding of Tenochtitlan. That is actually fascinating because Tenochtitlan was hugely important in South America for many, for at least several centuries. Teotihuacan is honestly the more interesting one. It was basically the trading post of South America pre Spanish arrival, but Tenochtitlan is also interesting. 200,000-year-old graffiti discovered in Marbella. Pet cats arrived in China via the Silk Road 1400 years ago, ancient DNA study finds. That's terribly important to all the cat lovers, I suppose. And there are drawings in the article, which is fucking hilarious. I will actually drop that in the chat because it's very funny if anyone would care to see it. Hailed as a knockout study. Places domestic cats in East Asia several hundred years later than previous studies. And cats were an instant hit, prized as exotic pets. So give or take in the 600s, somewhere in there. East Asian human gene that allows adult humans to digest sugars and milk likely came from Neanderthals. Cool. Uh, Inari Sami language? Is that native Finnish, I think? Yeah, Uralic language spoken in Finland. I'm now on the endangered languages subreddit, which I was not familiar with. Neat. Uh, Indigenous groups demand coca leaves be legalized in Colombia. Colombia's president says cocaine is no worse than whiskey as global efforts to decolonize the plant spread. I'll actually be interested to see how that goes, because there is a huge historical record of workers basically just chewing on coca leaves instead of, drinking coffee or whatever else as their stimulant to get through the day. And coca leaves are vastly different than cocaine. You get a little kick, but it's not anything like. It's a lot closer to caffeine than like a coffee or something than actual purified cocaine. Da, 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 da. Mateo Burial. What is that in the chat? Nope, nope, that is. We're gonna go ahead and ban you. Fucking bots. Okay. It is the second bot I've had to ban. Not today, just in total. Um, Apologies for that. All right. Chimps and bonobos relieve social tension by rubbing their genitals. I mean, humans too, I guess. Plant eating and meat eating Australopithecus. New approach to sampling nitrogen 15 in tooth enamel opens a window into the diets of early hominins. Fascinating. I assume you need a pretty serious mass spectrometer or electron microscope for that. Yeah, at the terrific level, yeah. Mass grave reveals victims of a 2,100-year-old massacre in war between East Asian empires. Which East Asian empires, though? Beyond the northern fortifications, Great Wall of China and present-day Mongolia. Bones of at least 17 skeletons show signs of bludgeoning, dismemberment, and decapitation. Rough. Several skulls were buried without matching bodies. Rough. Since discovery 16 years ago. Reasonably certain the remains found near the ruins of an ancient fortress in Mongolia belonged to soldiers slain during a historic war between the Chinese Han Dynasty and a nomadic empire of steppe warriors known as the Jianzhu. I'm confident that I mispronounced that shit. Jianzhu? No, no shot. But they couldn't tell which side's combatants. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay. So, archaeology, anthropology is at least broadly a more positive topic to read about these days. Um, I need to look up an old professor of mine at some point. Worked down in South America, Peru specifically, studying the Moche culture, which is fascinating. Um, he specifically has found pottery and artwork that is basically the rival to ancient Greece as far as narrative artwork on pottery. Really, really interesting stuff. Um, and fortunately, I had him as a professor. My only negative interaction with him was that he assigned a book for class that had like some labels. It was a archaeology class that we needed to know all the bones in the human body more or less. And he assigned a book for the class, and he had a different book that was like out of publication. It was like this is the gold standard for what all the bones are called, and some of them were different than in the book he assigned, and I was just like, what? I understand that he didn't have the license to like reprint his copy and hand it out, but if you're gonna test us on knowledge, could we maybe have the thing that has the knowledge you want us to have? Because that was a needlessly frustrating experience. The TA for that class was great though. Because he was uh, out of the country for a chunk of the class, and she was running all the tech setup to have him Zoom call in and give us lectures, which was very impressive. She handled that very well. But yeah, real fan of his class, but that one particular thing I did not enjoy. I would love to see what he's unearthed, though, to be honest, it's very possible that some of what he was doing was on grants that have now been illegally pulled by the current administration. And I know that a lot of researchers are just stopping funding outright because they're concerned that it'll get pulled, and so they don't want to promise things that they can't deliver, even though most, if not all, of that has been congressionally approved to be spent. Uh, just leaves a lot of researchers in the lurch. To be honest, I mean, it hurts as someone who loves archaeology to see that happen to archaeologists. But the ones that really terrify me are all the illegal firings of like CDC researchers who are working in labs that have live samples that need to be carefully tended to and monitored and refrigerated and all of this, and they're getting kicked out without time to save any of that research. And if, the power gets pulled, the fridge gets unplugged, etc., live samples that they've been studying for decades to determine changes for longitudinal studies can just die and that research is lost. Which is where, like, a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, I mean, Trump's doing crazy shit, but, it'll get reversed at the court level or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, but even if that holds, which my confidence is not enormously high, but if it holds, there's still an incredible amount of damage that's just been done um, that is irreversible. Whether that be, some probationary uh, federal employee got kicked out and isn't getting their pay quickly enough to make, rent or mortgage payment or whatever, leaving them in the lurch, potentially homeless, depending on what their support system looks like, to just research that needs constant attention uh, that can't get it. To programs that are helping people here and overseas. I mean, my God, in 2 months, this administration has destroyed a soft power that the US has been building for almost 100 years. I mean, basically, since we quit being isolationists in the early 20th century. Um, and that the soft power is the thing that people don't get. It's like we, yeah, we're giving money to this country to vaccinate their people, but that means that these people are no longer a potential breeding vector for, a virus or whatever that we would have to worry about them getting like a bad mutation of and then spreading it to us. It's not this purely altruistic thing, but in the meantime, people are getting food, medicine, whatever, and that means, I mean, this is an ancient tactic. A local lord would send around a troupe of players or, you know, uh, puppeteers, whatever, entertainers, wearing his colors, and they would roll into town and give a show to everybody. And that meant when the taxman rolled up wearing the same colors, the locals were far more inclined to comply with the taxman rather than stringing him up. Because new taxmen are expensive and you don't want to, lose them constantly going out every year. So that sort of exchange of, hey, we're going to give you something, and then when we show up and say, hey, it would be nice if you did X that we would like you to do, they're far more inclined to. And I mean, China understands this. They've been doing this in Africa for a few decades now, where they'll roll in and build a hospital, build a bridge, build a road, um, and constantly go, "Oh yeah, we got it. You're we just need you to do this little thing that will, give us favorable trade conditions, whatever else." Um, and so China is absolutely winning a soft power game that the U.S. was competing in until this past 2 months. And so now a lot of those African countries are reliant wholly on China and or Europe, but it means that they have fewer options. And the moment that uh, China sees that China is the only option that this country has, they will finally pounce using that soft power to turn, labor or resources to their advantage. That's the other thing that soft power tends to get you is decent mineral deals on raw materials. Um, but it's incredibly frustrating to watch this soft power and goodwill that the US had been building for most of a century just dissipate. And I mean, Europe and Canada are pissed, fair enough. Um, because not only did they watch the US put Trump into office twice, they almost watched us do it in 2020. Like, they have no reason to trust the American electorate. And because Congress is failing to rein in the powers of the president, they have no reason to believe that overreaching executive orders won't become the norm, or flip flopping constantly. And so, if you're looking for a reliable trade partner, Trump is signaling to the world that the US ain't it. And so, all of this soft power and uh, very careful diplomacy that we built up over time is just gone. And it will take probably a century to get any of that goodwill back. assuming the U.S. lasts a century, which I wouldn't put money on at the moment. Um, but really incredible, the speed at which, like looking at the difference between creation and destruction, the speed at which that goodwill and soft power was destroyed is truly incredible. Um, and I certainly don't blame Canada or Europe for the retaliatory tariffs. It's just protecting their own people. Um, and God, I mean, I haven't seen Canadians this worked up and patriotic in my lifetime. They're doing the elbow up thing, which is a hockey thing where you throw your elbow up when you're going into a fight so you don't catch a punch in the face. Um, but like I'm seeing them, boo Americans at stadiums. I'm seeing them, buy Canadian whiskey. It's just tough to watch all of that goodwill slip away. I'd, and I'd like there to be an answer, and I just don't know what the answer would be. Um, I mean, practically speaking, at some level, corporations would almost have to rebel against this sort of thing, which honestly, I'm shocked they're not when you're looking at the amount of money that's going down the drain. Like, I get that they're being promised tax cuts that could conceivably make them a whole bunch of money, but if the whole world stops buying American, your market gets a whole lot smaller. And I don't know if this is one of those like can't think past the next quarter things, but it's it's frustrating to watch just because I don't see a lot of countries being inclined to buy American beyond this point. Particularly, I mean, American manufacturing was already in trouble. So, like, you're seeing car manufacturers scramble to get manufacturing back stateside, which could conceivably be the genesis of some manufacturing jobs again in the U.S., which I would ordinarily say was a good thing. But A, we're looking at huge tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, which is going to make cars even more expensive. B, the only people that are likely to buy American cars right now are Americans because the rest of the world's pissed off pretty reasonably. I understand why they're where they are. I would love for there to be a simple answer, but I wondered, like, okay, so we read the stock market's down $5 trillion, which is just absurd, but whatever. Like, at what point do corporations step in to defend their own interests against the government that is just destroying them? Like, I don't know. I would love to have that answer, but it's like obvious. And the other trouble is they're billionaires. Like, they can potentially ride out the suffering, and then as everyone's poor as shit and prices plummet, buy everything up for dirt cheap, and then rent it back out to the American working public, whoever, however many are left. Um, but I don't. I would think at a certain point your losses would just be too great. Like, and maybe that's the idea. Maybe you ride it out, you deal with the losses, and then work your company back up. But the stock market's in free fall. Um, Certainly, luxury goods are going to be less desirable to Americans who are struggling enough to buy fucking eggs. Um, I just don't know what the pain point is. What is the break point for the billionaires and the corporations where they're like, all right, this has cost us too much. And if they get to that point, what is their way back? Um, Whether that's investing in foreign markets or just basically politically ousting current leadership through funding their opponents and whatever else. Because I mean, that's the threat that Musk has been throwing around is like he's going to fund the opposition of anyone who stands up to him in Congress, which is patently illegal, but it doesn't seem to matter much these days. I don't know. I think I am frustrated day to day. I think I would love for there to be easier answers, and I think that those just aren't really extant at the moment. I think kind of stuck waiting. And I had this thought during COVID, um, where it occurred to me that we were living through the part of the movie at the beginning that just kind of gets skipped over in the intro so that you can get to pardon me, so that you can get to the good part of the movie. And I kind of feel like that again. I feel like we are living in the intro to the movie prior to, I don't know, Cyberpunk, Robocop, Judge Dredd, where the interesting shit is on its way, but right now the despair and everything else is kind of all we got. So the movie skipped over that because you don't want to watch just that. But we are stuck in real time, just going through it. So who knows how long that lasts? But hopefully less than COVID. But we'll see. Sorry, water bottle. All right, I have. Yeah, it is a little funny to me, watching the right go on and on about illegal immigrants doing this, doing that. And knowing that Musk came into the country on a student visa and he lied on the student visa, which immediately makes it illegal. He qualifies as an illegal immigrant. He's doing all of the things they accuse George Soros of doing. So like it's not as though there isn't a problem with an illegal immigrants. It's just the one rather than illegal immigrants as a whole. And it's the one that they won't point at. So I don't even know. Sometimes it's the absurdity that gets me through. Laugh so you don't cry, that kind of thing. Could really do with a little less of these interesting times. All right. Chat seems relatively quiet this evening, so I'm gonna close the stream up a little early. Picked up a shift at work tomorrow, so I'd like to get some sleep. I appreciate everyone for hanging out. Um, Hope you all have a good evening. I'm gonna close the stream out. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Y'all have a good one.